Now we're going to look at the 10 lessons for level 4. Level 4 is pretty much vast and never expanding because it includes all of our auxiliary weapons or electives, whatever you want to call them. But for purposes of our core curriculum, level 4 is going to be the McGregor method, which is a system that teaches you to use any weapon that exists, or even your empty hands, as if you had a broadsword. So in theory, if you truly understand the McGregor method, just learning the McGregor method will allow you to use any other weapon you could think of effectively. We have those other auxiliary arts so that if you want to specialize in another weapon, you can. But really the McGregor method gives you everything that studying any of those other weapons could. So what we're going to use is 2 walking sticks. This is a falcon cane from Purple Heart Armories. In terms of a training walking stick or a good self-defense walking stick, this is a great option because it's hardwood, unlike a lot of walking sticks. If you actually had to use it for self-defense, it's not going to break the first time you hit the other guy with it. So this is a great weapon for training the McGregor method because it can be a broadsword, it can be a 2-handed weapon, it can even be something like a rifle and bayonet or a spear. And because it allows you to imitate all of those things, you can practice all of your McGregor method weapons using just your walking stick if you don't own a lot of gear, and you can at least understand the movements and how to apply the tactics, and then apply that knowledge to the proper weapons when you can actually get your hands on them. So the first lesson is the same shift and counter that you've seen with the broadsword lessons. It's going to be applied with a walking stick, and it's going to be applied with footwork that's a little more loose, because that's the nature of the McGregor method. You take everything that you have so far, and then you apply it with fluidity rather than in a strict way. So we're going to be in the hanging guard. I've got my walking stick, he has his, and he's going to try to hit me in the legs. And I'm going to shift back and avoid it, and I'm going to hit him in the head. That's the first lesson. Now, if we're applying this in a self-defense scenario, there's going to be a lot more random movement. And it doesn't have to look exactly like a proper form for a broadsword in order to contain the same principle. If you were using some kind of a 2-handed weapon and using one of the older stances, say you also have a 2-handed weapon, and he goes to cut my leg, the same concept applies. I step back and avoid, and I hit him at the same time. We're not going to look at all those permutations for every single one of these lessons, but just understand that they're meant to be applied to all kinds of different things. They're not meant to just be applied to one thing. I'll show you one more example. Let's say the bottom of this is a dirk, right? And he's coming in to stab. Again, just step back and avoid and hit him in the head. So right now we're just looking at it as a walking stick, though. He comes in to hit me in the leg. I avoid it and hit him in the head. The next one, we're going to be in outside guard. He's just going to make a cut 1. I'm going to respond with either cut 2 or 4. So I'm going to parry inside guard, and then I'm going to return cut 2 or 4. Well, in reality, if you're fighting somebody and you're using a stick, you'd never hit him just once. It'd be more like this. But we're only showing the first cut. This doesn't necessarily just represent a stick. This could be, for instance, a quarterstaff, and Archibald MacGregor's primary method of holding a quarterstaff is to have the left hand on top. And let's say he's cutting at my left cheek. McGregor says that you do something like an inside guard, but it's more perpendicular. So that would just be like that. And then I have cut 2 or cut 4, just as easily as if I was using a broadsword. So your left hand on top, and you cut here. So now we're in an inside guard, and he's going to cut 2. I'm going to block, and then I'm going to return either 1 or 3. And again, if we were using a two-handed weapon, like a quarterstaff, McGregor says that you use something like an outside guard, only it's more perpendicular. So he goes to make that cut 2, and there is a more perpendicular version of the outside guard. Then I can return either, well, yeah, 1 or 3. If he's doing this, if he's cutting me with cut 1, I can use the butt for that return strike. And McGregor says you can also have your right hand on top, so the same concept applies with your right hand on top. If he attacks me up here, there's a 4. Or a 2. So the angle's the same, you just add in the butt strikes. So you can make 1, 2, or 1, 4. And the tactical application is pretty much just the same, except that you add in the extra option of striking with the butt. So now we have another familiar technique, the lift and pommel. We're on the hanging guard. He goes to attack my head. I block, lift, trip him up with my left leg, while at the same time I'm pommeling him in the face. If I'm using a two-handed weapon, he goes in for a head attack, and I block it on the mids, which is the spot in between your hands. Lift and pommel. Now, if it's a really large weapon like a quarterstaff, you can't exactly lift that way because you're not taking your hand off the staff. But you have all kinds of options. So you apply the concept fluidly and with a lot of improvisation, and you can do the same thing no matter what weapon you have. If you had, say, an axe, say this was the head of an axe, you know, a short fighting axe, and he comes in to attack the head, and I can attack him either with the bottom of the axe, or I could just smash the axe into his head. The outside guard again, he goes to make a cut 1, and I apply the bind, and then I finish him off. Or I can choose to do an elbow lock instead. Bind or the elbow lock is fine. Let's say we're using a larger weapon, two-handed weapon, where he's attacking still with a cut 1. I can actually still apply the bind without any real change. He comes for the cut 1. You notice that there's an effect here which is like the Turkish disarm with the broadsword. When you get that same bind with a single broadsword, and he makes the cut, and you hook your pommel over and bind, when you're using a two-handed weapon, it's actually even easier to get that effect of hooking over. And if it's a longer weapon, it's going to come right on his neck right there. We're on lesson 6. We're on an inside guard. He goes to make cut 2. And I lift, jab him hard here, and then of course follow up. You wouldn't just do that. Or I can choose to back heel instead. Back heel is grabbing him here and collapsing his leg. So now we're looking at the use of thrusting weapons, which we're just going to delve into a little with the stick here. So we're in an outside guard. And he goes to cut 3, I parry and thrust. Let's say I had a spadroon, which is a sword that's in between a broadsword and a small sword. It's capable of cutting and thrusting equally well. He goes for his cut. I parry. He might be thinking that I'm going to change the line and go for a cut. That's what's so tricky about the spadroon. McGregor calls it a most deceiving weapon because he goes and thinks he's going to have to parry a cut like a broadsword would do. I can actually just thrust back in that same line much more quickly than a broadsword can. On the outside guard, he goes for that cut. There's the return. That's a thrust in the half circle guard. Lesson 8, if we're starting off in an inside guard, and he goes and tries to cut on a cut 4. Again, I can return a thrust. So where he might be thinking he needs to shift back and parry, make the cut, but he needs to shift back and parry a cut to his inside. That's what he probably thinks is going to happen, is something like that, and he's going to respond accordingly. So he goes to cut, and then he goes for a repost up there, and he actually just opens the door for me. That's what's so tricky about the spadroon. Now the last 2 lessons, 9 and 10, take a look at McGregor's own invention, his rifle and bayonet fencing system. If you can call it a system, because he describes it in just 2 sentences, I think. So your left hand is forward on your rifle, and your left foot is forward, and you stand in a kind of a reversed second position. And you hold it in a hanging guard. And when the opponent goes to thrust at you, you parry it and return your thrust. Or, as it is usually called with a rifle and bayonet, your push. So, you have your rifle stance. He goes to thrust, parry it off to the left for lesson 9, and return your thrust. Well, McGregor says you can also parry with the point up, so that should be considered part of his rifle and bayonet system too. But he says he doesn't like it as much as parrying with the point down. Now, if he's using a point up stance, and I'm using my preferred McGregor stance, and he goes in for his push, it's the same concept. I just push it off to the left and return my push. Now, lesson 10, the only difference is that I'm going to push it off to the right. So he goes in for his thrust. And which one you do in reality just depends on which one is more convenient to do in the moment. He goes in for his thrust. And you can do this same concept with spears. It gets a little more versatile because with a spear you can have either hand forward. And McGregor tells us that you have the option of parrying with the point up. So you have that option with the spear as well. So if you can have either hand forward and either foot forward, and you can parry with the tip up or with the tip down, all of a sudden you have a system for using the spear that has several options to it and is pretty versatile. McGregor just tells us that his preferred thing to do is to parry on the hanging guard. But you can do any number of other things. So if we are, let's say we have short spears, and we're having a little spear fight, Matt goes into thrust, or so you can change it up along any of these lines that makes sense and that works for you without feeling like what you're doing isn't what McGregor said, because McGregor actually says you have options. He just tells us which option he prefers. You can also, when you're actually using a spear, do this kind of thrust where it pushes through your lead hand. There's no reason to do that with a shorter two-handed thrusting weapon, but with something as long as a spear, that is a good and helpful option. Basic concept, though, McGregor's rifle and bayonet method is just to do this. The other guy goes into attack. Lesson 9 is that. And lesson 10 is that. That is the 10 lessons of the McGregor method. To actually apply them in practice with a variety of different weapons requires that you actually practice the different weapons and analyze for yourself in what ways the lessons apply to them and in what ways the lessons have to be modified a little to make them apply. So, let's say I have a tomahawk and my attacker has a knife. Say a stabbing knife, psycho style, and he's just coming in with an overhand stab. right? That's one of our lessons. Let's say he's slashing back and forth and he slashes low at my legs. That was one of our lessons. Let's say he makes a cut to my inside. That was one of our lessons. Let's say I'm unarmed. This is the unarmed stance. It's a hanging guard. Your left hand is just kind of covering your elbow. I'm not saying that this is going to succeed against a guy armed with a knife. Your odds are not great when you're unarmed against a guy with a knife. That doesn't mean there's nothing you can do. Let's say he's coming in for that attack up high. It's the same concept. Let's say he slashes up to here. That's the same concept as a bind. Let's say when he's slashing, I get him over here. That's the same concept as a lift. What I want you to understand here, it's not the idea that you should think, I'll apply this specific technique if somebody's coming at me with a knife. It's all happening way too fast for that. What I want you to understand is that these concepts from the McGregor method lessons can be applied to any number of situations and to any kind of weapon that you might have. Let's say I have the knife and he has the hock. He's coming in at me. I don't know what he's going to do. I'm not going to tell him what to do. He's taking it easy on me. He's going slow. But the basic concepts for everything that I'm showing you apply regardless of what weapon you have. I have a walking stick. He has an axe. You just modify what you have in those 10 lessons, apply it to whatever weapon you have and whatever the circumstance is. That's the idea.